I'm not the type to get scared easily, but that day was a real bombshell. I decided it was time to get away to a remote spot known for its stunning views. The plan was to spend some time alone, away from the city chaos. I figured camping in the woods would be the best way to achieve that. I got there in the late afternoon, just as the sun was about to dip behind the trees, and I quickly noticed that something was off. The landscape was exactly as I'd imagined: towering trees, a crystal-clear lake, and an overall sense of total peace. But then I stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. Torn tents, rotting food, and a bunch of trash scattered everywhere. My first thought was, "Oh great, must have been a group of people who ran off because of the rain or something." It didn't look like a place that had been abandoned for a long time, but there was something about the atmosphere that made me uneasy. I decided to set up my tent in a nearby spot, thinking it'd be the perfect place for privacy. While I was pitching the tent, I noticed an old, rundown cabin hidden among the trees. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were broken, and the roof was almost caved in. It was like time had stopped there. I was curious and decided to check it out, but it was clear that no one had been there for a while. As night began to fall, I tried to sleep, but started hearing strange noises. They weren't the typical forest sounds. There were heavy footsteps and the sound of something dragging on the ground. I got chills but tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. To make things worse, I started seeing distant lights through the forest, like someone was using flashlights. This just made me more uneasy. I remembered a story I'd heard about a group of people who used to throw parties in remote areas and didn't care much about rules. The idea that I might be in the middle of something like that made me even more anxious. What the hell was I doing there, alone, in a place that seemed straight out of a horror movie? What was supposed to be a peaceful spot turned into a scene of paranoia. I tried to calm down, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me alone. The environment was charged with a tension I couldn't explain. My nerves were on edge, and every little sound seemed amplified, as if the forest was full of secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. When the sun finally came up, my heart was racing, and I thought maybe what I'd heard during the night was just the result of fatigue and nerves. But the feeling that something was seriously wrong didn't go away. I decided to take a closer look at the abandoned campsite, hoping to understand what was making me so uneasy. As I rummaged through the place, I found a sleeping bag that was still warm. It looked like someone had left in a hurry not too long ago. That gave me chills. The idea that someone might be nearby, and maybe not very friendly, made me even more nervous. I thought about leaving, but curiosity kept me there, like I was stuck between wanting to figure out what was going on and being scared to face the unknown. In the afternoon, I started hearing noises again, this time clearer. They sounded like heavy footsteps and whispering conversations. My gut told me something was definitely off. The thought that people might be approaching with potentially bad intentions kept gnawing at me. The light of the afternoon was fading, and the atmosphere was growing more tense by the minute. Then, the next night, I heard a muffled scream, like someone was trying to hide. The panic made me get out of the tent, and when I turned on my flashlight, I saw a group of people approaching. I couldn't see them clearly, but they seemed to be moving in a coordinated and careful way. The flashlight beams lit up the area unevenly, making the shadows look like they were dancing around the trees. The strangers were talking quietly, and I caught a few words that made me even more anxious. It was something about leaving no trace, and being discreet. My heart was in my throat, and I was sweating bullets. It felt like I was about to witness something very serious and possibly dangerous. I tried to stay as quiet as possible, hiding between the trees, but the feeling of being watched kept haunting me. The tension was unbearable, and every sound seemed amplified. The idea that I might be in the middle of a situation that could quickly spiral out of control had me on high alert. Fear and uncertainty were overwhelming. My brain was trying to process what was happening, but panic was taking over. I knew I had to get out of there, but finding a safe and quick way to leave was a challenge in itself. I was caught between the urge to run and the fear that any movement might make things worse. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there before it was too late. The situation was slipping out of my control, and every second felt like it was dragging on, intensifying the terror I was experiencing. Man, I've got to tell you about something that happened to us that was seriously stomach-churning. My girlfriend, Lisa, and I decided to get away for the weekend and explore a trail in the Appalachian Mountains. Nothing major, just a chance to break the routine and get some fresh air, you know? No plans, just a casual outing. We got there, and the trail was super calm, totally different from the crowded tourist trails we're used to. The scenery was gorgeous, with those huge trees and a silence that was actually kind of relieving. We hiked for a while and halfway through, we stumbled upon a small clearing with an old tent and 2 folding chairs. There was a portable grill next to it, and a car parked a little further down. Nothing too crazy, we thought. Maybe some hunters or fishermen, who knows? But then things started to get weird. We saw 2 guys at the tent who were, honestly, kind of sketchy. One was an older guy, with a face like he'd been sucking on lemons all day, and the other was a younger dude who couldn't stop staring at us. They didn't seem exactly friendly, but they also didn't do anything that made us think we should be seriously worried. It was one of those moments where you get a chill down your spine but try to brush it off. We decided to keep going on the trail, but things kept getting creepier. Every time we looked back, the 2 guys were still there, watching us. It was like they were following us. Of course, we thought it was just our paranoia. We took a quick break, had a snack, and decided to head back. We just wanted to get out of there and enjoy the rest of the day somewhere else. When we got back to the car, guess what? The guy's car was parked right behind ours. They were there, just sitting still. It didn't feel right. The drive back to town was a nightmare. Lisa and I kept talking about what had happened, trying to figure out if we were just being paranoid or if something was really off. Then on Monday, while we were heading to work, I turned on the radio and heard a news report that made my blood run cold. They were talking about an elderly man who had gone missing in the Appalachian Mountains. His car had been found on the trail where we'd been. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same make and color of the car we saw on the trail. The news said the man had been missing for a few days, and the police were investigating. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The idea that we might have crossed paths with something really sinister was overwhelming. The fact that that car, which seemed so harmless, belonged to someone who was missing hit us hard. That feeling that something bad was behind those guys in the tent took over our minds. We kept wondering what they were doing there and if, in some way, they were involved in the old man's disappearance. The fear of having been so close to something so dangerous was terrifying. My friends Rick, Sarah, and Jake and I decided to spend a weekend hiking those mountain trails outside of town. The plan was simple, a hike to relax and unwind. The weather was perfect, and the only problem was Jake's knack for turning everything into a complete disaster, given he'd gotten lost twice before. We were pumped as we started the trail. The scenery was beautiful, and being out in nature was refreshing. However, something oddly unsettling started happening. Right at the beginning of the trail, we noticed a lone guy. He was at a good distance, but it was clear he was keeping an eye on us. He looked like one of those people who had nothing better to do, you know? He was dressed in camouflage, and his presence felt out of place in the middle of nature, like a fish out of water. Rick mentioned that the guy seemed a bit off, and I had to agree. It was kind of sketchy. But like any group of friends on a hike, we decided to play it cool and keep going. The guy started following us. He kept his distance, but you could feel he was there, just watching. Every time we turned around, he seemed to hide a little more. The mood was getting tense, and Jake started making jokes to lighten things up, but it just made everything weirder. He was trying to stay relaxed, but everyone could see he was nervous. After a while, the guy just disappeared. We were relieved, but the unease didn't go away. We decided to take a break and try to relax a bit. While we were sitting around, Rick and Sarah were discussing what to do that night, and I was scanning the surroundings when I saw the guy again, now much closer. He was watching from a hill, just standing there, not moving. That's when I started to get really uneasy. As the afternoon wore on, we decided to move on and try to forget the weird guy. The trail was getting tougher, and we were more focused on not falling into a hole or slipping than anything else. When it was starting to get dark, we found the perfect spot to camp. There was no sign of the guy, and we began setting up for the night. We were all relieved to finally be away from the weird guy. But again, while Jake was getting the fire going, Sarah and I started hearing noises. They sounded like footsteps, but we couldn't figure out where they were coming from. Jake was deep in his own world, making a mess with the fire, and Rick was checking the map, not paying much attention to what was going on around us. What started to freak us out was that, even without seeing the guy, it felt like he was still around. We began noticing things out of place, as if someone had been messing with our stuff. Lanterns went missing, and suddenly, our food was out of our camp area. Someone was definitely playing hide and seek with us. We decided to stay up rather than try to sleep. The fear that someone might come into our camp and do something more serious kept us on high alert. Every noise, every movement, seemed to come from the guy who had been following us. There was no real explanation for any of this, just a growing feeling that things were going south. Then, in the darkness of the night, we heard a sound that was impossible to ignore. Someone was banging something heavy against a tree, repeatedly. It was an almost rhythmic sound but completely disturbing. Rick decided to check it out, which wasn't the best idea. Sarah and I stayed behind, trying to keep calm while Jake was off in the corner, trying not to show how scared he really was. The sound suddenly stopped, and the tension in the air was palpable. It was as if the forest had decided to go silent just to let us stew in the anxiety of what was coming next. We had no idea what to expect. We just knew we wouldn't be sleeping anytime soon. That was our last day on the trail. The next morning, the guy didn't show up again, and we finally managed to get out of the forest. We didn't know what he wanted or why he was following us, but just the fact that he was there and made us feel so uncomfortable was enough to leave us all with a sense that something really wrong had happened. And to this day, I keep wondering if he was just watching us or if he had something much more sinister in mind.